The music was loud, the champagne was flowing, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and floor wax. It was my sister Brooke's wedding day, the day my mother, Diane, had been planning since Brooke was in diapers. I sat at table 12, wearing a sage green dress that felt 2 sizes too small for my soul. I was 32 years old, a successful project manager, yet in this room, under my mother's gaze, I felt like that invisible 18-year-old girl again. The reception was in full swing at the Ridgemont Country Club. My Aunt Patricia was on her 4th glass of wine. She leaned over, her breath smelling of grapes and secrets, and gripped my wrist. Her eyes were watery. "Alicia," she whispered, "I can't carry this anymore. Not today. Not when I see you looking at her like she's a saint." I frowned, trying to pull my hand away. "Aunt Pat, you're drunk. Let's get you some water." "No," she hissed, her voice cutting through the clinking of silverware. "You think you weren't good enough for New York? You think Columbia rejected you? They didn't, Alicia. I saw the envelope, blue and white. I saw your mother take it from the mailbox in 2012. I saw her walk to the backyard and toss it into the burn barrel. She didn't even open it. She just decided for you." The world stopped. The clinking of glasses, the laughter of the guests, the wedding band playing a jazz cover, it all turned into white noise. I looked across the room. There was my mother, Diane, holding a microphone, getting ready to give a toast about how perfect her family was. I stood up, my chair screeching against the hardwood floor. I walked straight to the head table. My heart was a drum, beating against my ribs. When I reached her, I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just leaned in and asked, "Mom, Aunt Pat says you burned my Columbia letter. Is that true?" Diane didn't even blink. She didn't look shocked that her secret was out. She just looked at me with that cold, practical smile and said, "It was 14 years ago, Asha. We were a family. You wouldn't have lasted a semester there. I saved you from failing." To understand why she did it, you have to understand the house I grew up in. It wasn't home, it was a ranking system. My sister Brooke was the star. She played the cello until her fingers bled, and my mother was there with ice packs and gold stars. Brooke had the best tutors. Brooke had the $200 an hour college consultant. And then there was me. I was the reliable one, the one who worked 30 hours a week at Sal's Pizzeria while maintaining a 3.9 GPA. I smelled like tomato sauce and old dough every night. I saved my tips in a shoebox under my bed. While Brooke was being groomed for greatness, I was being groomed to stay. "You're a local girl, Asha," my mother would say while she helped Brooke with her Ivy League essays. "You're steady. You're built for the community college life. Don't go getting ideas." But I did get ideas. I applied to Columbia University in secret. I used the library computer. I paid the application fee with $63 in crumpled $1 bills. I lived in a state of constant anxiety for months, waiting for a sign that I was more than just a local girl. In April 2012, the mail came at 3:15 p.m. My bus didn't drop me off until 3:40 p.m. For 25 minutes every day, my mother owned the mailbox. I asked her every day, "Did anything come?" And every day she looked me in the eye and said, "Nothing, honey. Maybe you just aren't what they're looking for." I believed her. I spent weeks crying into my pillow, feeling like a failure. The very next morning, she had printed out brochures for Tri-County Community College and left them next to my cereal bowl. She had been waiting for me to fail. For 14 long years, I walked through life with a weight on my shoulders that didn't belong to me. Every morning, I would wake up and remind myself that I was practical. I was the girl who didn't make the cut. When I graduated from Tri-County Community College with a 4.0 GPA, my mother didn't throw a party. She just nodded and said, "Good. Now you can get a real job and stay close to home." I transferred to Penn State, working 3 jobs just to keep my head above water. I didn't have the luxury of a college fund like Brooke did. I was the project manager of my own survival. By the time I hit 30, I was a senior project manager for a major firm. I was overseeing $4 million residential bills. I was the one people called when a foundation was cracking or a deadline was slipping. I was strong, I was capable, and I was entirely self-made. But the ghost of Columbia never left me.
Every time I drove past a prestigious university or saw a student in a blue and white sweatshirt, I felt a sharp pang in my chest. I told myself it was just ego. I told myself that the girl from the pizzeria simply wasn't Ivy League material. I believed my mother's voice in my head more than I believed my own bank account or my own promotions. My mother, Diane, never let me forget the hierarchy. At family dinners, she would spend 40 minutes talking about Brooke's new marketing campaign in Chicago. She would describe Brooke's office view, Brooke's business trips, and Brooke's expensive shoes. Then she would turn to me and say, "And Asia is still doing that construction work. It's so dirty, isn't it? But at least it's stable." She didn't just hide a letter. She tried to hide my entire potential. She wanted me to be the background character in Brooke's movie. She needed me to be the daughter who stayed nearby to run her errands and fix her leaky faucets, while Brooke was the one she could brag about to her friends at the country club.
6 months ago, a late-night internet rabbit hole changed everything. I was sitting in my home office, staring at a blueprint for a new luxury condo, when an ad popped up for Columbia University's School of General Studies. It was specifically designed for non-traditional students, people who had taken a break or had careers before finishing their elite education. My heart started racing. It was the same feeling I had back in 2012, sitting in the public library. I thought, I'm 32. I have a career. I don't need this. But the 18-year-old girl inside me, the one who smelled like pizza dough and disappointment, screamed, "Yes, you do." I applied that night. I didn't use my home address. I got a P.O. box in the next town over. I didn't tell a soul, not even my best friend. I wrote my essay about building houses while my own internal foundation was built on a lie. I poured everything into it. 2 weeks before Brooke's wedding, I walked into that post office. The clerk handed me a thick, heavy envelope. It didn't need to be opened for me to know what it was. The return address said, Columbia University, New York, NY. I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried for an hour. I wasn't just crying because I got in. I was crying because I realized that I had been good enough all along. I had spent 14 years in a prison where the door was actually unlocked the whole time. My mother hadn't just stolen an education. She had stolen a decade of my self-worth. The night before the wedding, the air was thick with tension. We were at the rehearsal dinner, and the champagne was flowing. My mother stood up, glass in hand, her eyes shining with pride as she looked at Brooke. "To Brooke," she began, her voice echoing in the hall. "My star, my daughter who always knew she was destined for greatness. From the first time she picked up a cello to her first big promotion, she has never settled for anything less than the best. A mother always knows when her child is special." She spoke for 9 minutes. She went through Brooke's life year by year. Not once did she mention my name. Not once did she acknowledge that I had paid for the rehearsal dinner flowers or that I was the one who had driven Grandma Martha 3 hours to be there. I was a ghost at the table. When she finally sat down, Aunt Patricia leaned over to me. She was already on her 3rd drink. She looked at me with a mix of pity and guilt. "She's lying, you know," Patricia whispered. "She's always lied about who the special one was." That was the spark. I didn't say anything then. I just gripped my purse, feeling the corner of that thick Columbia envelope through the fabric. I knew that the next day, at the wedding, the background character was going to take center stage. The reception was a whirlwind of white lace, expensive catering, and fake smiles. My sister Brooke was glowing, unaware that the foundation of our family was about to crumble. I sat at the family table, my fingers tracing the edge of the envelope hidden in my silk clutch. My mother, Diane, was in her element. She was holding court, telling the cousins and aunts about Brooke's Ivy League soul and how she always knew Brooke was the one destined for the spotlight. Then a cousin turned to me. "And what about you, Akeisha? Still doing the project management thing? It must be hard being the practical one." Diane didn't even let me breathe before she jumped in. "Oh, Akeisha is our rock. She does the office work, the heavy lifting. Not everyone is built for the fast track, you know. Some people are just meant to stay local and keep the gears turning."
That was it. The local comment. The same cage she had tried to lock me in for 14 years. Aunt Patricia, sitting next to me, slammed her champagne glass onto the table. The crystal shattered slightly at the base. The table went silent. "Stop it, Diane," Patricia shouted, her voice cutting through the wedding band's music. "Stop lying to her. Stop lying to everyone." Diane's smile didn't just fade, it vanished. "Patricia, you've had too much to drink. Let's get you a car." "I've had exactly enough to finally tell the truth," Patricia hissed. She looked me in the eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Akeisha, you didn't fail. You got in. 2012. I was staying at the house that summer. I saw the mail. It was a big, thick envelope from Columbia. Your mother took it before you got off the bus. She didn't even open it. She walked straight to the burn barrel in the backyard and watched your future turn into ash." The silence that followed was heavy. It felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. I looked at my mother. Her face was a mask of cold, hard stone. "Is it true?" I asked. My voice was a whisper, but in that silence it sounded like a gunshot. Diane took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed that her dinner was being interrupted. "I did what was best for the family, Akeisha. You were 18. You were impulsive. If you had gone to New York, you would have failed. And then who would have been here to help me with the house? Who would have supported Brooke? You wouldn't have lasted a single semester there." I felt a strange sensation. It wasn't just anger. It was clarity. For 14 years, I had let this woman define my worth based on a lie she created to keep me as her personal assistant. I reached into my purse. I didn't tremble. I pulled out the ivory envelope I had received at the P.O. box. I laid it on the white tablecloth right next to her wine glass. The blue crest of Columbia University was staring her in the face. "What is this?" Diane asked, her voice finally wavering. "That," I said, leaning in so only the table could hear, "is my second chance. I applied again 6 months ago, without your help, without your permission, and with my own money that I earned from the office work you love to mock." I opened the letter and read the first line out loud. "Dear Alicia Forrester, we are pleased to inform you." The guests at the nearby table started whispering. Brooke, my sister, stood there with her bouquet, her eyes wide with horror. She looked at our mother, then at me. "Mom, you really burned her letter?" Diane tried to grab my hand, her voice suddenly sweet and manipulative. "Alicia, honey, you're 32. It's too late for this. You have a mortgage, you have a career. Why throw it all away for a dream that passed you by?" "Because," I said, standing up and looking down at her, "the dream didn't pass me by. You tried to kill it, but it survived. And the best part? Columbia agrees with me. They didn't just accept me. They gave me a merit scholarship based on my practical career." Part 8, the aftermath, the walk into the night. I didn't wait for her to apologize. I knew an apology would never come. Women like Diane don't apologize. They just find new ways to be the victim. I turned to Brooke. "I love you, sis. Have a beautiful life." I kissed my grandmother Martha on the cheek. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Run, Alicia. Don't look back." I walked out of that country club, the sage green dress fluttering in the autumn wind. I got into my car, the one I had paid for myself, and I drove. I didn't go home. I drove toward the city lights. I'm in my second semester now. It's hard. I study until 3 a.m. after working my project management job. My GPA is a 3.7. I'm on the dean's list. And every time I walk through those iron gates on 116th Street, I feel the 18-year-old girl in the pizza shop walking right beside me. My mother hasn't called. My sister calls me every Sunday, and we are finally building a relationship that isn't filtered through our mother's lies. The lesson I learned wasn't that my mother was a villain. It was that I was the hero of my own story all along. I just had to stop waiting for her to give me the cape. It is never too late to open the door that someone else tried to weld shut.
Before I was a senior project manager, I was the girl who smelled like stale pepperoni and industrial-strength flour. Sal's Pizzeria wasn't just a job. It was my sanctuary and my prison. Every Friday and Saturday night, while my classmates were at football games or tailgating, I was scrubbing tomato sauce off stainless steel counters for $6 an hour. I remember one rainy Tuesday in November 2011. I was exhausted, my apron was soaked, and my hands were cracked from the cold dishwater. A group of girls from my high school walked in, girls who lived in the same neighborhood as Brooke. They saw me, whispered, and laughed. One of them intentionally dropped a slice of greasy pizza on the floor and looked me in the eye, saying, "Oops, guess you missed a spot, Asia." I didn't say a word. I just knelt down and cleaned it up. Why? Because that $5 tip they didn't leave was already calculated in my head. I needed exactly $63 for the Columbia application fee. Every insult I swallowed was a brick in the foundation of the life I was trying to build. My mother, Diane, would sometimes stop by the shop, not to check on me, but to pick up a free pie because her daughter worked there. She'd stand at the counter in her professional attire and look at me with a mix of pity and disdain. "Don't get too comfortable with the grease, Asia," she'd say. But then again, it's honest work for someone with your temperament. I would go home at midnight, my back aching, and sit at the kitchen table. While the rest of the house slept, I would pull out my worn-out SAT prep book. I didn't have a $200 an hour tutor like Brooke. I had a library card and a flickering desk lamp. I studied until the words blurred on the page, fueled by the hope that one day I wouldn't have to scrub anyone else's floor ever again. When the rejection from Columbia came, or rather, when the silence became deafening, I felt like a ghost. Enrolling at Tri-County Community College felt like walking into my own funeral. I sat in the back of the lecture halls, wearing my high school hoodie, trying to disappear. My mother made sure to remind me of my place every single morning. She'd leave the kitchen TV on loud, broadcasting news about Ivy League graduations or elite internships. "Look at that, Asancha," she'd say, pointing at the screen. "Some people are just born for that world. It's okay to be a late bloomer, even if the flower never quite opens." But something happened in my second year. I took a course on structural engineering. The professor, a retired architect named Mr. Henderson, saw me sketching a bridge design in the margins of my notebook. He walked over, looked at it for a long time, and said, "You have a spatial mind, Miss Forrester. You see the world in segments and loads. Why are you here?" I told him I wasn't good enough for anywhere else. He laughed, a deep, gravelly sound. "Someone lied to you," he said. That was the first time in my life an adult had told me the truth. He pushed me to transfer to Penn State. He helped me realize that even if I was local, my mind didn't have to be. By the time I was 28, I was the only woman on most construction sites. I wasn't just managing projects, I was managing egos. I remember my first big break, a 6-story luxury apartment complex. The lead contractor, a man who had been in the business for 40 years, refused to look me in the eye during the briefing. "Listen, sweetheart," he said, blowing cigar smoke toward my hard hat. "Just make sure the permits are filed. Leave the actual building to the men." I didn't get angry. I had learned from the best, my mother. I knew how to play the long game. 3 weeks later, I found a catastrophic error in his foundation blueprints. If we had poured the concrete that day, the building would have tilted within 5 years. I called a meeting with the investors, presented the data, and had him removed from the project by sunset. That was the day I stopped being the girl from the pizzeria and became the senior project manager. I was earning 6 figures. I was successful. But every time I went home for Thanksgiving, Diane would ask me to pass the gravy and say, "So, are you still wearing those ugly boots to work? It's such a shame you didn't go into marketing like Brooke. She looks so elegant in her office." I realized then that no matter how many skyscrapers I built, I would always be behind the scenes in my mother's eyes. She didn't hate my job. She hated my independence. She hated that I had built a life without her permission.
Growing up, Brooke was the sun, and I was the shadow. At least that's how my mother, Diane, wanted it. But what people didn't see behind the closed doors of our suburban home was the guilt Brooke carried. She was only 14 when I was 18, but she wasn't blind. I remember a night in 2012, just weeks after I had been told Columbia rejected me. I was sitting on the back porch, staring at the dark trees, feeling like my life was already over before it began. Brooke came out, her cello bow still in her hand. She sat next to me, her small shoulders slumped. "Anisha," she whispered, "I saw Mom at the burn barrel today. She was smiling while she watched the paper curl into black smoke. I think she's afraid of you." I didn't understand it then. I thought Brooke was just being a kid, trying to make me feel better. "She's not afraid of me, Brooke. She's just disappointed. I didn't make the cut." Brooke looked at me with eyes that were too old for her face. "No, she's afraid that if you leave, she'll have no one to control. She needs you to be the stable one, so she can keep being the perfect one."
We didn't talk about it again for a decade, but that night, a tiny seed of doubt was planted in my mind. As we grew older, Diane tried to pit us against each other. She would tell me Brooke was naturally gifted, and tell Brooke that I was bitter about my own failures. It was a classic divide and conquer strategy, but it didn't work. Every time I got a promotion, Brooke was the first person I texted. Every time she felt the pressure of Diane's expectations, she'd come to my house and hide on my couch. We were two survivors of the same psychological war, just fighting on different fronts. At her wedding, when the truth finally exploded, the look on Brooke's face wasn't surprise. It was the look of someone finally seeing the monster they'd been living with.
September 2026. The air in Upper Manhattan was crisp, smelling of roasted nuts and old books. I stood at the corner of 114th Street and Broadway, looking up at the Low Memorial Library. I was 32 years old. I had a mortgage, a decade of professional experience, and a heart that was finally beating for me. Walking onto that campus felt like walking into a dream I had been woken up from 14 years ago. I saw the 18-year-old girls with their fresh backpacks and their nervous smiles. They were exactly who I was supposed to be in 2012. I didn't feel jealous of them. I felt proud. I had taken the longest, hardest road possible to get here, but I had made it. On my first day of Introduction to Urban Planning, the professor asked us to introduce ourselves and explain why we were there. When it was my turn, the room went quiet. "My name is Asiya Forrester," I said, my voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "I spent 14 years building cities for other people. Now I'm here to learn how to build a future for myself." I sat in that lecture hall taking notes on my high-end laptop, and I realized something profound. If I had come here at 18, I might have been intimidated. I might have struggled. But at 32, I was a force of nature. I had managed multi-million-dollar budgets and handled angry contractors. A midterm exam was nothing compared to a structural failure on a construction site. My mother had told me I wouldn't last a semester. She thought I was weak. She thought her lies had broken my spirit. But what she didn't realize was that every year she held me back, she was accidentally tempering me like steel. I remember sitting on the steps of the library during lunch, watching the sunset over the Hudson River. I took out my phone and looked at my call history. No missed calls from Diane, no texts. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for her approval. I wasn't checking the mailbox for her lies. I was exactly where I was meant to be.
While I was building my new life in the heart of New York City, the house I grew up in was beginning to feel like a tomb. My mother, Diane, had spent 30 years controlling the narrative. She was the perfect mother with the perfect daughters. But when the truth came out at Brooke's wedding, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. News travels fast in a small town like Ridgemont. Aunt Patricia wasn't the only one who had stayed silent for years. Others had seen the glimpses of Diane's manipulation. Slowly, the invitations to the country club stopped coming. The neighbors who used to stop by for coffee began to look away when they saw her in the driveway. But the biggest blow came from Brooke, my sister, the one Diane had invested everything in, finally chose a side. A month after the wedding, Brooke called me, her voice trembling. "Asiya, I told her I won't come home for Christmas. I told her that until she sits down with a therapist and looks you in the eye to apologize, she doesn't have a daughter named Brooke anymore." Diane was left alone in that big house with her brochures and her systems. She tried to call me once at 3 a.m. I saw her name on my phone screen, glowing in the dark of my Manhattan apartment. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel a need for revenge. I just felt nothing. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short and bitter. "I hope you're happy, Asiya. You've destroyed this family over a piece of paper from 14 years ago. I hope those fancy professors are worth the bridge you burned." I didn't call her back. I realized then that Diane didn't regret what she did. She only regretted that she got caught. She was a woman who would rather rule over a kingdom of ashes than let her daughter be her equal.
May 2028. The morning was bright, the sky a piercing shade of Columbia blue. I stood in my light blue graduation gown, the heavy tassel of my cap brushing against my cheek. I was 34 years old. As the names were called, I looked out at the sea of faces. Brooke was there, cheering louder than anyone, holding a sign that said, "That's my sister."
Aunt Patricia was there, wearing a hat that was far too big for her, wiping tears from her eyes. Even my old boss from the construction firm had flown in to see his best manager walk across that stage. But there was one seat empty, the seat I had mentally reserved for my mother for 14 years. And for the first time, seeing that empty space didn't hurt. It felt like freedom. When my name was called, Alasia Forrester, magna cum laude, I didn't just walk, I floated. As I took my diploma, I looked at the dean and whispered, "I'm 14 years late, but I'm exactly on time." I spent the afternoon sitting on the steps of the low library with Brooke. We ate pizza, not the fancy New York kind, but the greasy, cheap kind that reminded us of home. We laughed about the burn barrel and the brochures. We talked about our future, not as the golden child in the shadow, but as two women who had finally found their own light. I am no longer the girl who smells like pizza dough and disappointment. I am Alasia Forrester, a Columbia graduate, and a woman who knows that no one, not even the person who gave you life, has the right to tell you how large your dreams can be. If you are listening to this and you feel like someone has stolen your time, remember my story. 14 years is a long time, but it isn't forever. The mailbox might be empty today, and the fires might be burning your letters, but they cannot burn the fire inside you. It is never too late to open the door. It is never too late to come home to yourself.